Hi everyone and welcome to the A-Level Media Taster session. So what we're going to do today is basically just run through what sort of things you would study at A-Level Media, what sort of texts, the way that you'll be assessed, and then we'll have a go at doing that ourselves. So if we go over onto the first slide. So what I would like you to do is first and foremost come up with a definition for what you think media is. Once that you've done that, I would like you to think of as many examples of media studies as you can. So while we do that, if you could pause this video for around about 5 minutes and then we'll go through some answers. Okay, so now that you've had a few minutes to think of that as to what media is, here's the definition and some key examples of what media is. So media is the main means of mass communication, so that could be broadcasting, publishing, the internet, and all of that as a collective. So some examples of media is advertising and marketing, films and music videos, newspapers, radio, video games, TV, magazines, and online and social media. And these are all things that we would study as part of your A-level. So this is the way that you'll be assessed. So throughout your 2 years at A-level, you'll revise all of these things, and then at the end of year 13, you'll sit 2 exams. You'll have component 1, which is worth 35% of your overall A-level, and that is 2 hours and 15 minutes worth of an exam, and that is studying media products, industries and audiences. Component 2 is also worth 35% of your overall qualification, which is a 2 hour and 30-minute exam, and that is looking at media forms and products in depth. Component 3 is a little bit different. This is your coursework, or your NEA as we call it, your non-exam assessment. That's worth 30% of your qualification. It's a cross-media production, so what that means is you will create your own piece of media, or own pieces of media, based on a topic that the exam board decide and give to us around about March time. So you would create your own different types of media, whether that is a film poster, for example, you might create your own magazine. It just depends on what they decide for us to do. So these are the sort of things that you'll study. So in component 1, you'll look at adverts, and that's both a print advert and audio-visual advert, and that'll be advertising Tide, WaterAid, and Kiss of the Vampire. Tide and Tide and Kiss of the Vampire are both print adverts, and WaterAid is an audio-visual advert. So we'll study those 3 in depth, looking at all of the different types of the theoretical framework, which is something that I'll go through later on. You'll also look at music videos. So the ones that we have chosen for our school is Formation by Beyonce and Riptide by Vance Joy. And we'll look at the videos surrounding that and the way that they've been produced and how it creates meanings and things like that. For newspapers, you'll look at the newspaper industry in depth, but specifically you'll look at 2 key newspapers, and that's the Time and the Daily Mirror. We'll also look at films. We'll look at Black Panther and then I, Daniel Blake. With those films, you'll have the opportunity to look at key parts of the film. You'll look at the film industry. You'll look at the target audience and how they target audiences. You'll look at the advertising, and all of those things brought together to make the film a success, basically, and you'll compare the 2. For radio, you'll look at an extract from the Late Night Woman's Hour, and you'll also look at Late Night Woman's Hour in general, but we'll focus on a key specific extract from that. And then we'll also look at Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation, and that's for video games. For component 2, you look at 3 key aspects of media: TV shows, magazines, and online media. So for our school, you'll either study Humans and The Returned, or you'll study Life on Mars and The Bridge. So with each of those TV shows, what you'll do is focus on 1 key episode. Usually it's the first episode of the series, and then compare it to the other TV show that we're looking at. And we'll look at all aspects of the theoretical framework there, so media language, representation, audience, and industry. And that's the same for the other 2 as well. So for magazines, we'll look at Vogue and The Big Issue. And then online media, we'll look at Zoella and the Attitude website. So let's have a look at a key theory here, and then we'll see if we can apply it to a key piece of media, which is part of something that you'll study if you do take A-level media. So we look at various different theorists throughout our time at doing your A-levels. So one of the main ones here is semiotics, which is a media theory by a person called Roland Barthes. And his main idea was that texts communicate their meanings through a process of signification. And this is the idea that signs can function at a level of denotation, which is the literal meaning of something, the common sense meaning of something. And then you've got a level of connotation, which involves the meaning associated or suggested with a sign. So kind of reading between the lines, looking at what we associate with it. Barthes also had the idea that constructed meanings can come to seem self-evident, achieving the status of a myth through this process of naturalization. So basically what that means, looking at the connotations of things through years and years and years of these connotations, everybody might associate a certain sign or a certain thing with something else on a more of a metaphorical level. So if we have a look at some examples here, there's the definitions. So for example, we would have a cross. So if we're looking at the denotation of it, literally, it is a cross. If we look at the connotations of it, what do we associate? Associations of religion, Christianity, faith, Jesus, God, things like that. And then if we're looking at how it has become naturalized, everybody generally associates a cross with religion because throughout years and years and years, that is what it has come to mean. However, as it says on the bottom, the reading of signs by an individual relies upon cultural influence as well. So what that means is what a certain sign might mean to one person might mean something completely different to somebody else, and that's just based on cultural influence. So one thing that you can start to think of is how the symbol of a cross might be read or interpreted differently depending on certain people's ideologies. So if you pause this video for a couple of minutes, then you can make some notes on what other connotations someone might have on the cross based on their cultural influence. Okay, what I'd like you to do is, based on what we've just done there, I would like you to do the same things for these global cultural signs. So we've got 3 signs here. I would like you to start off by telling me the denotation, so what does it literally mean? What is it literally? What is the sign? Then you can start to think about the connotation, so what do we associate with that sign? What do we associate with the image? If you would like to do an extra challenge on top of that and think about cultural ideologies and how people might associate different things with it, that would be really interesting to start to think about as well. So if you pause this video for about 10 minutes, make some notes on each of the signs, each of the images, and then we will go through the answers. Okay, so hopefully you've had a few minutes to go through each of these signs. So what I thought might be useful is if we go through a few together. So if we start off with this first image here, we've got, if we're looking at the denotation, literally it's a dove or a white bird of some description. If we look at the connotations of that, quite often they connote peace and love and happiness. And generally throughout the years, that is what we've come to associate with it, which is quite often why you might get doves, for example, at a wedding, because of the connotations that we associate with it. The second one, literally, it is a coloured flag. But if we're looking at the connotations of it, we now know that it means acceptance, it means love, it's a representation of the LGBTQ plus community. And I think this is an example of how over the years that is something that we fully associate with it because of what it stands for. If we look at the third one, this is a little bit more open to interpretation, I think. So quite literally, it is a big yellow M with the sign "I'm loving it" underneath it. We all know that that is the sign for McDonald's. So again, it's up to the individual as to what that might stand for. Some people might literally just think that it stands for fast food, something tasty, something nice to eat. If we look at things on the other side of it, however, some people might see that this has connotations of perhaps obesity. Some people might think that it's got connotations of monopolization and wealth, things like that. But as you can see, different people might view something in different ways, and that's absolutely fine, just as long as you can support that and back that up. So let's have a look at one of the set texts that you'll be studying for your A-levels, and this is Black Panther. What I thought that we might start off with is looking at the DVD cover of Black Panther. So it might be useful if you perhaps printed this out, or if you can't print it out, maybe just make some notes specifically on what it is that you're wanting to talk about. I would like you to use Barth's semiotic theory to aid your analysis, and I've got some bullet points on here as to what sort of things you might annotate for. So the first one that we've got on there is the mise en scène, and what that means is basically just the arrangement of the set, what you can physically see, what it looks like, how it's been arranged. You might look at the colour palette and what the connotations of each of the colours are and why you think it might have been created in that way. You can look at the font of Black Panther. The creation of enigma. An enigma is mystery and suspense. So it's the idea of not giving too much away to make it more interesting when you do come to watch it. If you create enigma, you're more likely to be intrigued to see what's going to happen, so you're more likely to watch the film. You can look at the main image and the placement of the main image, or the placement of the key characters. You can look at the lighting. So where have they decided to, when they're taking the images of the characters, where have they put the light in? Why might they have done that? The costumes of each of the characters, and then if you're aware of what Black Panther is, what the film's about, you can kind of relate it to that. If you don't know what Black Panther is about, you might be able to start to have a guess as to what it is about based on the costumes. You can also look at the gestures and the body language and facial expression. One good thing to look at is when you're looking at body language and facial expressions is where the characters are looking, and that might give us some ideas as to what's going on, who our main characters are, who the protagonists might be, who the antagonists might be. You could look at what's in the foreground and what's in the background. When you're looking at the foreground, obviously that would be the main characters and things, but then it's quite interesting to look at what's going on behind the main image, and that might give us a little bit more idea as to what's going on. And then the last one that's on there is the rule of thirds. Now, the rule of thirds is the idea of splitting the page into 9, I suppose. So draw 2 lines down the middle and 2 lines down the middle on the other way. Then you can see what's in the middle of the image. And that's probably been placed there on purpose because that's where your eyes are naturally drawn to. So you can see what is in the middle of the text and why you think that it's been placed there. So start off with the denotation, so what is literally there, then you can start to look at the connotations as to what it suggests. So I would think about maybe pausing this video for about 15-20 minutes, making some notes, and we can come together and look at some ideas. Okay, let's have a look at some things that we might pick out. If we start off with the colour, we've got a lot of silvery metallic colours, we've got blues ranged in different hues from quite dark blue to quite light blue, and then we've got black there as well. So if we're to look at the connotations of that, if you're looking at the silver sort of metallic colour, that kind of suggests industry and things being created and things being made and things being built. And that kind of links to what's going on in the background. You can see that there's a lot of skyscrapers and high-rise buildings and things like that, and that suggests that the area is quite prosperous. If we look at the blues, generally it's, well, if we're looking at the colour blue, it depends on the different connotations of it. In this sense, I think it works quite well with what we've just been discussing about the metallic sort of colours, and it again suggests sort of industry. However, with the dark blues and the black, it creates that enigma, which is what we've mentioned in the 4th bullet point, and creates that suspense because we don't quite know what's going on and what's happening. If we were to look at the font, it's blue and it's surrounded by that gold colour. So again, that gold colour really suggests prosperity, and we might explore what the text might be like because of that. If you look at the N as well, and the way that the N's been created on the panther, it looks a little bit like a spear of some description or a knife or something like that. So if we look at the connotations of that, we might suggest that there's been some form of fighting or some form of battle or war or something. Underneath that, it says, "Long live the king." So that kind of links to what we were saying about the gold, which connotes prosperity. As it says there, "Long live the king," it suggests some form of royal family. that might be who the main characters may be. We've already mentioned the creation of enigma. However, we can look at that in a little bit more detail. We don't really get many ideas as to what the text is about. We can see on there that it does look like a lot of people are set up for battle. However, at the same time, some of the other characters do look like they're not at all going to be part of that battle. So perhaps it might be some people who are fighting and some people who they're going to be saving, perhaps. As well as in the background, again, we don't get much as to what's going on. We can assume that it's some form of prosperous city by the looks of it, but again, we don't really get much information as to what's happening. With the lighting, you can see that it is, if we're talking about the rule of thirds, just above the title where it says Black Panther and just below where the main images are, it's quite bright and then it dims out around the outside of it. However, when we're looking at each of the characters, it looks like the lighting is shone straight into their faces, and that kind of brings the focus to each of our main characters. You might look at if we're looking at body language of each of the characters, you could see the main character, who we would assume is the main character anyway, at the forefront. He's the biggest character, the biggest picture there, and he's making direct eye contact with the camera, and that has connotations of being quite powerful, being in charge. So when it says long live the king, we might assume that that might be the king. We might assume that that might be our main protagonist. Looking at the other characters, most of them are also looking away into the distance, which suggests that perhaps they might be working in different ways, working against each other. You can look at some characters that are looking one way, another character which is perhaps looking another way. That might suggest that they might be the people who are battling against each other. Quite a lot of these characters are standing in quite powerful poses if we're looking at their body language, as though, like I said before, they're ready for battle. And I believe, obviously, there would be quite a lot of other things to pick out for there, but I think that might be the main thing that we might look at. So if we pause the video now and go on to the next slide. So here is another theory, and this is the representation theory by a person called Stuart Hall. So Hall's idea was that representation is the production of meaning through language, with language defined in its broadest sense of a system of signs. The idea that the relationship between concepts and signs is governed by codes. The idea that stereotyping as a form of representation reduces people to a few simple characteristics or traits. The idea that stereotyping tends to occur where there are inequalities of power, as subordinate or excluded groups are constructed as different or other. So basically what that means is, looking at stereotyping, it suggests that there's only certain groups of people, and it reduces a group of people to just a few characteristics or traits, which can lead, as it says there, to inequalities of power. So it's quite interesting to look at how certain characters or certain things are represented in a text. Representation is one of our main areas of the theoretical framework. So what we were just looking at on the previous task was media language. Representation is the second section in the 4 areas, I guess, that you're assessed for in media. So let's have a look again at the Black Panther front page, and we're looking at that from the perspective of representation. So we need to be thinking about what can be suggested about gender and ethnicity from this cover. So I put some key points that you might want to consider here. So Black cinema has traditionally consisted of issues-based social realism, for example, the films of Spike Lee, or have been art house or prestige pictures. So these are all different types of the way that a film can be produced. Blade, which was created in 1998, is one of the few superhero films to have a main black character, as is Black Panther. In 2016, there was a hashtag, which was hashtag #OscarsSoWhite, drew attention to the lack of diversity in the films that were nominated. You might want to also look at the way that the media tends to portray Africa, which is where Black Panther is set, as a developing country focusing on civil wars, famine, things like that. If you've seen Black Panther, then this is where you can start to look at what the text is actually about in comparison to perhaps stereotypes in that sense. You could have a look at male and female stereotyping, and then also look at how these stereotypes have been broken in Black Panther. So what I'd like you to do, again, if you pause this video for around about 15 minutes or so, and have a look either at the DVD cover or at the text as a whole, if you've seen it, and think about how the characters, and either in terms of gender or ethnicity, have been presented. And then we'll go through some answers in around about 15 minutes or so. Okay, so if we have a look at some answers now that you've had a go at analysing this yourself, if we start off by looking at gender representation, we can have a look at some of the images on the DVD cover, and then we can start to look at the text as a whole. So generally, if we look at stereotyping, the stereotype of women is that they're often presented as being quite meek and mild and weak, and the people who would need saving. However, we can see from this front cover that the 4 female characters that are on there, at least 2 of them have weapons, so they look like they are ready to fight, which goes against, it breaks the stereotypes that have generally been built up. Even if we look at the 2 characters who don't have a weapon, they're still standing very powerfully. They've got a very powerful stance, and the eye contact and things like that. So again, that breaks the stereotype. In the actual text of Black Panther, the people who are in their army, I guess, the people who fight, it's male and females alike. There is no gender difference, I guess, which is a really positive thing, because again, it breaks the stereotype. It's different to what is often represented in the media or in texts. If we were then to look at ethnicity, so as we said in that 3rd bullet point, in the points to consider, often the media tends to portray Africa as a developing country, focusing on civil wars, famine, things like that. That stereotype's completely broken in the DVD cover, because as we mentioned before, when you look in the background of the text, in the background of the DVD cover, it looks like a very prosperous, developed city. If you look at some of the weapons that are created as well, especially with the character Shuri, who's in the bottom corner here, her weapons look very different to the sort of weapons that we're used to, which again suggests that they are kind of surpassing where we are in the weapons and things like that. However, we can also compare that perhaps to some of the other characters. So this character who's in the middle, and the character who is looking off to one side, they have sort of weapons that we might expect to see if we're looking at stereotypes. Generally, in the text Black Panther, as it said there in the 2nd bullet point, where it's saying the Oscars So White hashtag drew attention to the lack of diversity in the films nominated, this film kind of broke all boundaries with that, which was really impressive for everybody to see, really. So you can kind of see how we can look at what the stereotypes are, and we can see how they've been broken, which is a really interesting way to look at things. And that is it. So thank you all very much for coming and having a go at this media A-level taster session. If you do have any other questions about media studies at A-level, feel free to come and find me, Mr. Hobbs or Mrs. Tiplady, and we'll be more than happy to help or answer any of your questions. And I really hope that I'll see some of you next year in media studies. Thank you very much, everyone.